Hello, thank you for tuning into the Gospel Tabernacle. My name is Ben Cantrell. I'm going to be talking to us tonight a little bit about Judas. We obviously by now you know what we are doing. We are doing everyday devotional leading up to the Easter Sunday, the death, resurrection, burial of Christ. By now we've already heard of Palm Sunday, Jesus clearing the temple, and we've heard the curse of the fig tree. But I want to talk to us for just a moment about a key pivotal role that took place in this week. Without this role and without this choice, we would probably not have the liberty that we have now, because Jesus would not have been crucified at that time, at least. And this is Judas's agreement to betray the Lord. Judas's agreement to betray Jesus Christ. And we find this in Mark chapter 14 and verse 10. And just a quick reading of it, it says, "And Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went unto the chief priests to betray him unto them. And when they heard it, they were glad, and promised to give him money. And he sought how he might conveniently betray him." And that was Mark 14, verses 10 and 11. So here we find the choice that Judas had made to betray the Lord. And as I begin to study this, I begin to think, why would Judas even agree or want to betray the Lord? He was one of the 12. And I'm going to condense this down because I know I'm on a short time and a short leash here. But Judas was with the 12. He was there when Jesus had healed the sick. He was there when he had raised the dead. He was there when he had fed the 5,000s and the multitudes. He was, no doubt, he was there when Jesus walked on the water. And he had been there and seen all these miraculous miracles and all these things happen. And he may have even been one of the disciples, because Jesus gave power to his disciples to cast out devils and to heal the sick. And no doubt Judas was one of those that came back to the Lord rejoicing that the devils were subject unto them. And no doubt he was one of the ones that had cast out devils and had healed the sick. But yet we find Judas is now agreeing to betray the Lord. What has to change and what has to click in Judas's mind to go from performing the miraculous and walking with the Lord to giving him up to be crucified? Just a story of an individual I want to go to is about Charles Blondie. It's back into the 18th century. He was a Frenchman that was a tightrope walker. And tightrope walkers are a little bit of a fascination to me. I've never understood the appeal to walk on a skinny rope across heights that could kill you. But this individual wanted to be the first person to ever cross Niagara Falls. And like I said, I believe it was in the 18th century. The date, I don't exactly remember, but it was a 1,300-foot cable that was in 2 inches in diameter that he had strewn across the Niagara Falls from the U.S. to the Canadian side. And he wanted to be the first individual to cross this gap. Now, keep in mind, if he had failed, it would have been death. If he would have fallen, it would have been, he would not have any other second chance. And the conditions were terrible. It would have been wet. It would have been cold. And the crosswinds from the rapid water that is rushing over the waterfalls were estimated to be at 78 miles per hour crosswind on this cable. No doubt it was dangerous, of course, but he nevertheless crossed. Not only did he cross with one of the balancing rods, but he crossed and then again he came back across with the balancing rod. And then weeks or days later, he went across the Niagara Falls with a camera. As if it wasn't enough to cross with a balancing pole. He went across with one of the old style cameras. Remember, this is the 18th century. It's not like a digital camera that you have today. It was one of the tripod cameras that you had to put your head under the cloth. It was one of the big cameras. He had to cross. And he stopped halfway across and he took a picture. He stopped, posed on this cable and took a picture. Then he kept going. Days and weeks went by and he went across this tightrope again, this time carrying a small stove. Again, keep in mind, this is back in the 18th century. This was a cast iron small stove. It was not light by any means. And he went across the cable and stopped halfway. And then he created a fire and cooked breakfast. And lowering it down by a rope down to the water on an individual that was on a ship below that was watching. He had stopped, created a fire, and cooked breakfast halfway across this rope. 2-inch diameter, this individual. Then he proceeded to pick up the stove and carry it the rest of the way. Again, he crossed at a later date, running across the rope. And then another time he crossed doing flips and somersaults. And so it was to no surprise that when he came with the wheelbarrow, he thought, everybody thought, well, of course, he's going to cross the rope with the wheelbarrow. And they didn't think anything of it. And at the time when he had this wheelbarrow, there was a famous prince, and the name of the individual, it leaves me, but he told to this individual, he says, do you believe that I can cross this rope pushing this wheelbarrow? And he said, well, of course, you've done cross this rope doing harder things than that. And he proceeded to tell him, said, do you believe that I can cross this tightrope with someone in the wheelbarrow? And he said, well, yeah, you've done it before. I mean, you've done things that was probably harder than that. And he goes, well, then get in the wheelbarrow. To which the prince replied, no way. See, it's a difference when we're walking with the Lord, and it's a difference when we see someone else doing it. But when the Lord asks us to do it, and He asks us to stay in the wheelbarrow, it becomes personal to us. See, Jesus had only asked His disciples to live for Him. He had only asked His disciples to perform the miracles, to live a holy, separated life, to obey the commandments, and to follow Him. He said, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. But Judas, at some point, refused to stay in the wheelbarrow. Something had clicked in his mind that said, I no longer will trust in the Lord. And there's something that is changed in my life, and I no longer will succumb to the will of the Lord. I no longer will myself and yield myself to the Lord's will and getting in the wheelbarrow. Today, if I could say anything to anybody, don't get away from the Lord. Judas had already betrayed the Lord. There's no need for you to do it. He's already been to Calvary. So don't betray the Lord. Stay in the wheelbarrow. Stay in the faith in the will of the Lord. Thank you for tuning in to Gospel Tabernacle. Again, my name is Brother Ben Cantrell. We look forward to seeing you back in the house of the Lord when all this pandemic is gone. Until then, stay safe, stay prayed up, and go in the faith of the Lord. Thank you.